Tonight on Primetime Politics, standing by a controversial program.
Will the Prime Minister stop the politics, fire the minister?
What the Minister of Public Safety and this government are doing is tightening the border.
The Prime Minister is forced to defend the Liberal gun buyback program and the minister responsible for the file. CPAC's Andrew Thompson will tell us about a very testy exchange today in the Commons. Also,
what we need to see is that commitment for money, as well as a commitment to building this in the right way.
The Prime Minister's environmental priorities will get an assessment from the David Suzuki Foundation and hear a warning from a former Environment Minister.
I feel like I was played for a fool. I tried, to do this grand bargain.
Plus, Lisa Raitt and McLellan on the economic potential of the government's national projects. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. We begin tonight in the House of Commons, where earlier this afternoon there was a very heated exchange. The Prime Minister asked about his government's gun buyback program and his public safety minister, whose private comments seemed to question the program's worth. Andrew Thompson is here to tell us more about what took place today. So, really quite the testy exchange in the House of Commons, Andrew. Arguably the most heated exchange of the fall session so far.
Absolutely, Michael. And this follows Gary Nandasangari getting battered yesterday over that recording that emerged over his comments about gun buybacks, saying that police don't have the resources to implement it and that it's all happening because of pressure from Quebec voters. The Prime Minister supporting Nandasangari at his news conference in New York last night. But today, Mark Carney was back in the House of Commons for question period and facing a barrage from the official opposition leader, including this from Pierre Poilievre.
The public safety minister has admitted that going after farmers and hunters rifles is not going to fight crime. So the only reason to do this is politics. If he was telling the truth, then why not reverse? If not, why isn't he fired?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the gun registry, what the government is doing with the gun registry is putting in place a much more efficient way. An efficient way for Canadians to voluntarily return prohibited firearms, for fair compensation. This government is going to do it right.
And Michael, this back and forth went on for another 5 minutes. The Prime Minister saying that the Public Safety Minister is working to fix an inefficient system. And at the end of the day, that gun buyback program is moving forward, and Gary Nandasangari remains in charge of public safety, though certainly it can seem at times like it's a bit of a cursed file, Michael. 5 public safety ministers in recent years have tried to implement that program.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a hard one for the Liberals, has been controversial from the beginning, remains controversial today, and now this controversy over the public safety minister himself. Andrew, thank you for that. CPAC's Andrew Thompson. Well, ahead of Mark Carney's appearance today in the House of Commons, he also wrapped up a 3-day mission at the United Nations, where we saw the Prime Minister outline Canadian priorities, as well as talk about the emerging issues caused by the major global shifts that are happening right now, shifts that the Prime Minister says Canada is ready for.
We have what the world wants. Canada is an energy superpower in both clean and conventional energy. We're amongst the top 5 producers of the world's most important critical minerals. We're a leading developer of artificial intelligence, and we have the world's best talent in quantum and computer science. The second reason is we embody the values to which much, not all, but much of the world aspires. Canada has always been and always will be committed to fundamental human rights, to human dignity, to individual freedom and sustainability.
And to that last point on sustainability, the Prime Minister also took part today in a global roundtable on sustainability and economic resilience. Arguably, the most we have heard from Mr. Carney on environmental priorities since winning the election back in April. Now, of course, much of the attention has been focused on Mr. Carney's goal of developing these projects of national significance, the first tranche of which were announced just 2 weeks ago. And to talk about this, we're now joined by Stephen Thomas. He is the Clean Energy Manager with the David Suzuki Foundation. Stephen, thank you for coming to the studio.
Thanks so much for having me.
Listen, I want to acknowledge, first and foremost, you're actually in town with partner groups trying to push forward a national electricity grid, which we're going to talk about in a second. But I first wanted to get your reaction to the Prime Minister, you know, mentioning sustainability at the United Nations this week, the first time he's really talked about the environment since being elected, because despite his environmental credentials, what we have heard from Mr. Carney in recent weeks has been essentially the cancellation of the carbon rebate program and the suspension of the 2026 EV mandate. So I wonder, are you at all comforted to hear him mention sustainability again?
So we know that the Prime Minister understands the issue of climate change, understands that Canada is seeing the impacts of climate change more than ever. But we want to see the Prime Minister take that understanding into action. As you mentioned, most of the actions that we've seen from this Prime Minister so far have been backtracks when it comes to our action on climate change. You mentioned a couple, but we're also now not on track to meet our 2030 climate commitments. What I also heard the Prime Minister say at the UN table today is that we should be using public resources that are scarce in the best way possible. And we think that's exactly what we're here to push for with the Prime Minister when it comes to the east-west electricity grid based on renewables.
Okay, let's talk a bit about that, because you are pushing this electricity grid as a project of national significance that was not included in the first tranche. It was not mentioned as possible second-tier projects for the government to pursue. What exactly are you calling on the government to invest in?
So we're really excited to be on Parliament Hill today talking with more than 36 MPs about this issue of building an east-west electricity grid that's based on renewables, that is based on Indigenous-led projects, and that respects the rights of workers. The coalition's pretty wide-ranging, and we're doing this work together for the first time. We're coming from labor unions to municipally elected officials like councillors and mayors.
Making the argument that
this east-west electricity grid is worthwhile here in Canada, as we're looking for big ideas that solve the problems that we're facing as a country. We think they should look no further than building out this east-west grid based on renewables, because it's going to save people money on their power bills. It's going to create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs here in Canada, all while we do what we can toward climate action and having better air for ourselves and for our children when it comes to our health.
Mm-hmm. You know, do a compare and contrast for me, because when you look at the first tranche of projects, there are environmental arguments made around them. For example, LNG, copper mine, small nuclear reactors, all cleaner forms of energy or leading to cleaner forms of energy. Compare that to what you're suggesting here as a national project.
So it's disappointing to see fossil fuel projects like LNG be considered in this first tranche. And what we think we need to move toward instead are industries that are here to stay. The rest of the world is moving away from oil and gas, so building export like oil pipelines or like natural gas facilities to export LNG, we think is a step in the wrong direction. These are industries and these are sectors that are not here for the long term, not if we have a planet for our children and grandchildren to inherit. So what we really want is to show up for communities, show up for workers for the long term. So when we talk about building out the electricity grid, no matter what crystal ball you're looking in here in Canada, we're going to be using a lot more electricity in the near term, and the rest of our economy is going to electrify as we move away from those fossil fuels. So the jobs we're creating to build out this grid are here to stay.
Now, part of the calculus, though, you know, in expediting these deals, prioritizing these projects, is this idea that it's not just the projects themselves, but the very fact that behind them are the backing of provinces and territories, other partners. So they're stepping forward. It allows for a national deal to be reached at a far faster rate, which Canada's economy needs right now. Does your project have the national backing that the others do?
We think it does. We don't have a proponent for an exact electricity line between, two example provinces right now, but we think that is because the federal government hasn't yet declared this as a priority. In the past, the federal government has tried to have projects like this work. You might remember the Atlantic Loop from a few years ago. But when we try to do this as a country, it tends to fall apart when we talk about who pays for it. So certainly utilities, provinces, and the First Nations, who we think should own much of this infrastructure, all have resources to contribute here. But the federal government also has to put in federal dollars as well as that convening power to make sure
Does that slow down then? Because part of this is a quick investment in order to create economic growth to basically counter Donald Trump's tariff war.
Exactly.
So is there the speed behind this project if you don't yet have a national proponent?
We think there is, because this can be sequenced. Unlike a pipeline where you have to build the whole thing from east to west, when we talk about the east-west electricity grid, it can happen in place and piecemeal. If two provinces are ready to go with their version of this electricity grid, they can start building it next year. The other thing that's part of this vision of an east-west grid are the renewable projects that power it. So those are certainly shovel-ready. Those can be spun up from an idea to an operating project in as little as 2 or 3 years. So when we're looking for shovel-ready projects, it's this idea of the electricity grid, it's the idea of renewables that we think we should be reaching for. The other thing I'll mention here when we're talking about the threats from the United States, especially with sectors like steel and aluminum, that's exactly what this grid is built of. When we talk about the transmission towers and the transmission lines, they're built of aluminum and steel. So we need Canadian content, and we need to make sure that we're showing up for workers to build out this grid.
Quickly running out of time, but again, we heard the Prime Minister mention sustainability this week more audibly than he has in the past few weeks. Do you think that you will find a champion within the government on this now that the Prime Minister has brought up sustainability as an issue again?
I hope so. I hope that the Prime Minister turns these words into action when it comes to acting on climate change, because again, we've seen too many steps backward. That's what we're here this week to do with about 30 of our colleagues across these 17 organizations. So we do hope that they listen, and we're certainly here with an open door as we talk about how best to build out the East-West grid in Canada.
Stephen Thomas, thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you so much.
As we just heard, environmental leaders do have some questions about Mark Carney right now, not about his green credentials, but about his priorities as he continues to talk about national projects. It's something I talked about recently with the former Minister of the Environment, Catherine McKenna. Take a listen to what she had to say about the current Prime Minister.
Well, I mean, look, I've known Mark Carney, personally and professionally since I was minister. Well, even before that, but he came to support carbon pricing in our climate plan when he was governor of the Bank of England, and we both worked for the UN Secretary General on climate at the same time. I'm still doing work for the Secretary General. Look, I'm waiting to see what the climate plan is. There has been no climate plan put out, but the way you're judged on climate is whether the emissions go down. Like, we have a target. The planet only cares about whether emissions go down. Of course, you've got to do it in a way that you can sell the policies and in the way that's affordable and makes us more competitive. But he's talked about this. He knows, he read a book called Values, and he talks about how climate is an existential crisis and how there's a huge economic opportunity. And if we don't do this, that the market will actually, there'll be a Minsky moment and the market will collapse. So he knows all this. So I'm waiting to see. I do get worried that when I hear talks of a grand bargain with oil and gas companies. I tried. By the way, I tried. I'm a reasonable person. When I came in and the Alberta government, it was Rachel Notley, was working on climate. They had a cap on emissions. They had a methane. Requirement. They had a price on pollution, and they had oil and gas companies standing beside them saying they were going to do their part. So we worked really hard. And by the way, we bought a pipeline, and I talk about that in the book. It's pretty hard being the environment minister when you're buying a pipeline. But then the oil and gas companies totally misled everyone. They greenwashed. They said they were going to do things on climate. They didn't. The only thing they did was increase their emissions, while they made massive profits largely off of an illegal war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and then they didn't put those profits into clean. They gave huge amounts of money and bonuses to CEOs, and then they gave the rest of the money back to shareholders, mostly American, and then they demand subsidies, and they're the cause of the climate crisis. Like, I think they are taking Canadians for fools, and so I don't believe in a grand bargain. I believe that they have to pay to clean up the pollution that they've caused, like everyone else is doing. They are the only sector that is not reducing their emissions, and they are a third of our emissions. So I'm hoping to see a much stronger carbon price for oil and gas and large polluters. We have methane regulations that need to be put in place, and really to see, you know, oil and gas driving down emissions and us living up to our international commitments.
So what do you make then of carbon capture? Because that is essentially the grand deal now. You invest in carbon capture, at the same time expand into potentially a pipeline, certainly to LNG. What would your advice to the Prime Minister be on that?
Well, I would just say, like, the oil and gas companies have talked about CCS, carbon capture and storage, for decades. They had massive profits. They invested no money while they advertised that they were clean. So I would be very careful on that front. And what I don't understand is why they would get subsidies and support for carbon capture and storage when they've only increased their emissions and everyone else has had to decrease them. No, they can pay their own money, my view. And I'm not in politics, and it's tough being Prime Minister, and it's tough working on climate change while you've got to deal with Donald Trump and trade, the trade war or trade situation. But I just think we have limited money as government. Like, when you're in government, you got to really figure out how you invest. And the oil and gas companies have tons of money. So it should be up to them to reduce their emissions. And then you can't be lobbying against climate policies. They're lobbying against the price on pollution that they are supposed to pay. It is a basic principle that polluters should pay for the pollution they cause, not Canadians. But they don't want to do that. So this idea that you privatize the profits and you socialize the costs is not okay. It's not. It shouldn't be okay for anyone who just believes in the market and believes that governments don't have infinite amounts of money. So I think that'll be the test for the government, because really when it comes to climate right now, oil and gas is the largest source of emissions, and it just continues to go up. And I think, I feel like I was played for a fool. I tried, to do this grand bargain, and that they would, reduce their emissions. There would be a pipeline because, we need to get our product to market. And they didn't live up to the deal. And that's hurting Canada's reputation internationally.
The former Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna, whose new memoir, Run Like a Girl, was released yesterday. The full conversation can be seen this weekend on a new episode of Profile. You can catch it Sunday on this channel, on our website, and on YouTube. The full conversation goes on to explore her thoughts on Justin Trudeau as a team leader and McKenna's call to arms for girls and young women. Well, as I said earlier, it's been 2 weeks since the Prime Minister unveiled his first list of national projects. They are as follows: investing and prioritizing Phase 2 of LNG Canada's production in Kitimat, small modular reactors, or SMRs, at Ontario's Darlington nuclear plant, the expansion of the Contrecoeur terminal administered by the Port of Montreal, the McIlvenna Bay Foran copper mine in Saskatchewan, and the expansion of the Red Chris mine in northwestern BC. All projects that the Prime Minister describes as nation builders, capable, he says, of generating billions of dollars in economic activity at a time when Canada's economy is facing grave challenges. So, for their thoughts on all this, we're now joined by former Deputy Prime Minister in the Martin government, Anne McLellan, and former Minister in the Harper government, Lisa Raitt, co-chairs of the Coalition for a Better Future. Hello to both of you.
Hello, Michael.
Nice to see you again.
Nice seeing you too. I say it each time you're here. Happy to say it again. The Coalition is concerned with essentially economic growth in this country, because that goes to the individual wealth of Canadians and also the health and wealth of our social programs. So fairly important. And here we are faced with this huge economic challenge south of the border and this national list from the Prime Minister. What do you make of what's been announced so far by this government in terms of investing and prioritizing for building the economy, Lisa?
So they picked the first 5 projects that are going to work. I think setting up the major projects office makes a lot of sense. The Harper government had that as well. And it helps you actually have like a concierge position where people can go through it. Except this one's a bit different. This one has more power, and it's going to do 2 things. One, it's going to help with regulatory issues. So, for example, the mine and probably LNG2 are going to need a little bit of regulatory help. But the other 3, Contrecoeur, OPG, and then the last, and Darlington, no, that's Darlington. And then the last
You're
one.
talking about the Red Chris mine.
Yeah.
2 copper mines.
2 copper mines.
Yes.
The mines and the LNG are going to have regulatory help. The other two are going to have government contributions. And that's where this Major Projects Office will come in as well. They're going to do the analysis and help Cabinet understand the decision points along the way, which is always the problem with trying to get to a decision. So they'll map it out, they'll show you what the decision means, when it has to be taken, and then it really is up to Cabinet to say yes or no to the projects going forward.
So talk a bit about that, because basically it's road mapping for Cabinet where the economy needs to go. How effective do you think that's actually going to be, Anne?
I think the announcement of these first 5 projects is going to be a kind of starter, if you like, in terms of letting the business community and more Canadians more generally, but letting the business community know that this government is serious about building things, building more things, and building them faster. And in terms of these particular 5 projects, the Prime Minister has said that they are going to infuse something around $60 billion into the Canadian economy. And that's not insignificant, but it's not nearly enough, as we all know. So I think it's pretty clear this sends a signal. And to Lisa's point, the Prime Minister and the people around him want to have a successful launch, right? They want projects people can look at. They can understand why they were chosen, and they have a really good chance, high chance, of getting over the line. I like the way Minister Hodgson put it in some of the interviews he's done, although we have way too many sports analogies now, Michael. But he talks about the red zone, those last 10 yards in football, getting the ball into the end zone over those last 10 yards. And I think that's what you were talking about, right, in terms of just getting that little extra push. These projects are generally, some of them further along than others, obviously, but they're moving through the process. But it's the last 10 yards. If you don't get the ball into the end zone, you've lost.
Okay, so
and three of them are purely private sector, which means it's just the regulatory side. The other 2 are quasi-government, but with investors coming in. So it's a very clear signal to corporate Canada, hey, we're open for business, let's get moving. And Anne and I talk about that. So important within the coalition. Yeah,
well, and I do want to pick up on that point, because we have in the past talked about how, you know, investment in Canada can lag and has been lagging and not meeting what this economy needs. And you hear the Prime Minister talk about these projects and announcing them being a catalytic effect on projects and on the economy, in that it's meant to encourage other investment. Will it, in these projects, will it writ large, if the world knows that Canada's open for business, you know, symbolized by these first 5?
Yeah. Well, let's use mining as an example. From conception to permitting and opening of a mine, it can be 16 to 20 years in this country. Showing that we can open 2 mines is a really big deal for people to start thinking about critical minerals. And then you've got the muscle memory of how to actually get these projects done for the Ring of Fire, for lithium mines, for nickel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, as Lisa has mentioned, the Prime Minister has talked about what that next tranche or grouping might look like and what it might involve, and projects that aren't quite as far along, some probably pretty early in the planning process. He's talked about pathways, where there's been discussions between the province of Alberta, the Government of Canada, and the Pathways Alliance for actually a number of years. And right now, we're not sure where those discussions are, but quite clearly the Prime Minister's interested in moving those discussions forward. He talks about decarbonizing the barrel. And if the country wants an oil pipeline, it's going to be mesh together with the decarbonization of the barrel of oil coming out of the oil sands. So, you know, the Prime Minister, I think, is sending, with these first 5, as we've said, clear signal to the business community. But I think this next group, you're going to see a lot more ambition. And you know, yesterday I was listening, I was at an event here in the city, listening to the chair of Rio Tinto, the second largest mining company in the world, Dominic Barton, talk about ambition. That was actually the name of his comments yesterday, ambition. And he talked about something you and I have talked about for 4 years, which is that the private sector in this country has been too complacent. And they need to step up, and they need to innovate, whether it's AI or other technologies. They need to invest in their own country. And I think what the Prime Minister's doing with both this tranche and the next tranche and whatever comes after that is saying, hey, we're open for business, but we need the private sector in this country to step up and work with us.
Well, you talk to industry, and you know, certainly in your role, Lisa, you talk to a lot of industry leaders. Are you hearing a change in tone because we're hearing this change of tone in Ottawa now?
It's not a change of tone. It's, I would say, hope, for lack of a better word. They're cautiously hopeful, right? Cautiously optimistic. They want to see the proof that this time the government gets the problem, because yes, it's an invitation to the private sector to come in, but I think the government also has to recognize is that both federal and provincial, they get in the way of projects too. And if they pile in too many regulatory processes, if they make it too difficult, that's when companies kind of go, oh, is it really worth the effort? And I'm hoping that showing a good path through the regulatory process in the two mines specifically, that's going to really help give the confidence. And of course, I wouldn't be me from Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, but if I didn't mention, you know, Tim Houston, Premier Tim Houston and his Wind West project, which is incredibly exciting on the East Coast. It's one of those projects that Anne points out is very nascent, starting at the very beginning, but boy, can it make a difference and bring in lots of investment? 100%.
Well, it's interesting to see the enthusiasm around that. I'm sorry to jump in because, you know, we've only got a couple of minutes left. But, you know, so we're seeing the potential of all this. I think that's what you're identifying, the potential, and, you know, thumbs up for creating that potential. But we're not yet done. So what are the pitfalls that you would warn this government and provincial governments about as we move forward in this process?
You have to prove that you can execute. The government and the private sector both have to prove that they can execute on these projects. Now, I think if the private sector were here, they would say, yeah, execution, but we need some help in terms of some relief from various kinds of regulations. Maybe, in fact, we need a tax break. Or some other kind of incentive. So I think clearly people are going to be watching, and not only people in this country, money around the world is going to be watching to see if the new office, how it's run, the private sector's inclination to step up, whether this all comes together in a way that says, yeah, there's something real here. There's something that tells us we can take our dollars and put them in Canada and they can actually build something.
Lisa, pitfalls?
Pitfalls. It's along the lines of what Anne's talking about. It's you have to listen to industry when they tell you what's a barrier and not kind of frou-frou it away, saying, well, that's not really a barrier. And I'd also say to industry as well, don't come to the government hoping to stack up the Canada Growth Fund with the Canada Infrastructure Bank, with the Major Projects Office. This isn't about trying to get more money into projects that are questionably profitable. These are real projects that governments want and that companies want to do, but they're just held up because of something in the way. And that's those projects, all of them, I think all of them that are on the list.
Okay, I always appreciate the time with the two of you. Always enjoyed the time with the two of you. And Lisa, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Wednesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.